Hi, this is Dominic Pace, who plays Gekko the Bounty Hunter from The Mandalorian, and you are listening to Star Wars Comics in Canon.
Hello there and welcome to Star Wars Comics in Canon, your guide to the wider Star Wars canon through the comic book lens. And to take you on this journey, I'm your host, Mike Burton. And so brings episode 53. So guys, this week I am tackling issues 50 to 55 of the main run of Star Wars comics. These come together and make the arc Hope Dies, which is as dour as you would expect it to be. Issue number 50 was released in July 2018, issue number 55 was released in October 2018, and the trade paperback collection was released in December 2018. The writer is Kieron Gillen, the artist is Salvador Larroca, and the colour artist is Guru EFX. Now to clarify, this set of comics is set 1 year after the Battle of Yavin, so it's about 1 year after A New Hope and about 2 years before The Empire Strikes Back. When Kieron Gillen was asked about the sort of inspiration for this arc, he basically said that a lot of people in the rebellion got promotions quite quickly, and there's quite a lot of generals and things who are in there suddenly in sort of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. So exploring that idea, this is a story where a lot of the rebel leaders die, which you can gather by the name of this story. It's a really cool one, and there's going to be lots of little connections to characters that pop up for like 1 second, which is Star Wars in a nutshell. But I also want to mention, within the trade paperback collection, you also get the Star Wars Annual number 4. Now, I think I've tackled the other Star Wars annuals on this show, sort of amidst other things, but I hadn't actually read it. I read it before pressing record today, and it is basically just, there's a few timeline and continuity errors, but essentially it's fairly cool. Luke has to collect some credits from this guy who owes the rebellion some. It's a pod racing track. Sana Starros is there. There's some dark side lightsabers, which Sana Starros collects, and Vader's got one as well, and it's got some cool little connections, and it's got some quite interesting moments in there as well, but overall it doesn't really add to anything, and there are a couple of sort of iffy bits about continuity. The start of it says it takes place before Star Wars issue number 8, but from what actually happens in there, you'd think it happened before Star Wars issue number 4. But it's a good comic. It's worth a read. I'm not going to go into any more than that. But if you want to see Darth Vader, Sana Starros, and Luke Skywalker kind of squabbling over 2 really old dark side lightsabers while on a pod racing track, then go ahead. You get to watch Luke do a bit of pod racing too, so lots of fun. But I'm not going to be tackling that, I'm just going to be tackling these main 6 issues. But funnily enough, issue number 50, which is the first of the batch, has a small story within it called Shu-Torun Lives. Now, I will be tackling that at the end of my narration of the first issue. So once I've finished talking about issue number 50, I'll get onto that because it just gives a bit more information and whatnot, and then I'll get onto issue number 51 and onwards. I also want to point out that the character in this, Queen Trios, who is in the main run of Star Wars comics here and there, she first appeared in episode 23 of Star Wars Comics in Canon, which was actually where I tackled the 3rd volume of the first run of Darth Vader comics called The Shu-Torun War. That was issues 16 to 19, and it was written by Kieron Gillen, unsurprisingly. So a lot of connections there, and just a little run through. I've put it in the description, but all of the previous episodes I've done of the main run of Star Wars comics, I've now put them on YouTube under Genuine Chit-Chat, where I upload all these episodes. I've started putting things into playlists, so there's a playlist of Darth Vader, one of Dr. Aphra, sort of the main run of Star Wars comics. There's lots of them, bits and pieces as well. So if you're wondering where to start, or if you just want to find out what every episode of whoever is, you can go over to the YouTube channel and check out the playlists there. So just for clarity, the main run of Star Wars comics I tackled in episodes 9, 13, 19, 21, 27, 36, 40, and 44. In that, I didn't include the Yoda Secret War arc because that's kind of its own thing, and I didn't include where I tackled the Journals of Old Ben Kenobi because they're kind of their own thing too. But that is it. So let's go on to the narrative then. So starting with the Crawl. Hope Dies, Part 1. The murder of their beloved king at the hands of the evil empire has inspired open revolt on Mon Cala. Thanks to a timely counterattack by Admiral Akbar, as well as the heroics of Luke Skywalker, Princess Leia, and Han Solo, the Mon Calamari's powerful fleet now stands ready to fight for peace and justice with the Rebel Alliance. Armed with new ships and new allies, the rebellion is finally poised to take back the galaxy from the Empire in earnest. But the rebels also owe their recent victory to Queen Trios of Shu-Torun and her defection to their cause, but Trios may have plans of her own. So issue 50 starts with the rebels at Mako-Ta, which seems to be like a giant star or a sun where the rebels have amassed their fleet. Mon Mothma is speaking to Princess Leia. She is the woman who wears a lot of white, is ginger, and shows up in A New Hope and Rogue One. I think she might show up in the other original trilogy films. She's in Star Wars Rebels. She's like a massive part of the rebellion, even if the films don't really allude to that very much, but I've spoken about her ad nauseum on this podcast, so I'm not going to go into all the details about her again. So she's talking to Leia, and then Leia speaks to Queen Trios. And while this is going on, there's loads of rebel leaders around them, sort of with their amassed fleet. They're kind of congratulating themselves for being able to pull off and to be able to pull together the different cells of the rebellion to form the Rebel Alliance. While this is happening, Han is actually in a bar, or a cantina, at a place called the Ring of Kafrene. And that's quite interesting because it's actually in Rogue One, right at the very start of Rogue One, and it's where Cassian kills Tivik. So, right at the start of the film, when you've got Cassian and he speaks to that guy, and the guy's got his busted arm, and he tells Cassian, the Empire are planning on making a planet killer, blah, 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 and then Cassian has to shoot him and escape. That is on the place Ring of Kafrene. And what I quite like about this issue and the issue before this one is that they link him with Rogue One quite a lot. Well, I say this issue and the one before it. This arc and the one before it, the one before it was the mutiny on Mon Cala, but the one before that was the Ashes of Jeddah, which is when the trio go to Jeddah after the events of Rogue One, which is a really interesting story, actually. It's one of the best of the main run of Star Wars comics. It's very, very cool. And it's written by Kieron Gillen, so of course it's brilliant. But yeah, he's basically there with C-3PO, and they're being trailed by bounty hunters. He buys something off this bug alien thing, which is a species that doesn't seem to appear anywhere else, so I'm just going to leave that. They then leave the cantina. They manage to outwit the bounty hunters, take their gun. Jabba the Hutt gets mentioned, and then Han says that he's got transponder codes, and he mentions Luke. So going back to the rebels at Mako-Ta, it turns out that they've had all their ships fitted with Shu-Torun tech by Queen Trios, so all of their things have basically been upgraded thanks to her. While this is happening, Luke and the other X-Wing pilots do basically a light show. So when we see at least over here in England, I think they do it across the world as well, you get fighter pilots flying their planes, and then they have like smoke coming out of it, normally of different colours. I think the red arrows, are quite a famous one over here. And, they normally have different colour smoke and things, and they do cool things in the sky and skywriting in a sense. Well, it's basically that, but with light instead of smoke. So they do this light show to kind of celebrate everything. And then you've got a few groups of people. You've got Dodonna, you've got Hera, you've got Mon Mothma, you've got them all sort of speaking in things, all varying rebels, and Mon Mothma gives a speech. The speech is meant to be a way of when she says certain words, the whole fleet activates hyperspace and then leaves, but the hyperspace fails, and then they turn around and Queen Trios appears to be missing. Imperial Star Destroyers appear, and the blast doors around the ships won't open, so the fighters can't actually launch. While this happens, Leia speaks to a gentleman named Draven, asking him about Trios' ship sending a team down there. He said there's already a team that's already down there, and they're going to go intercept. The Imperial Star Destroyers destroy one of the rebels' cruisers immediately, and the person on that is someone called Vanden Willard. They're in A New Hope, and you're going to get this a lot of most of the characters who died who've got names in this. They seem to be a character who is in either Rogue One or A New Hope, probably had like one line of dialogue, and would be vaguely recognisable. Jan Dodonna is one of those people. But Vanden Willard, he's a clean-shaven, older man, and I think he says to Leia that he's glad that she's safe because they'd feared the worst when obviously everything happened with Alderaan. So vaguely, if you have a perfect memory and you know exactly who that is, that's Vanden Willard. After his cruiser is destroyed, the final panels of this comic basically just shows Vader talking to an Imperial officer. They ask who the next target is for the Empire, and Vader replies with Hope, which is where obviously the name of this comic arc came from. What's quite cool as well is in issue 50, there's actually a cover gallery of the last 50 issues of Star Wars, of the main comics, and you actually get to see them all sort of tiled together. It just looks quite cool, and I thought I'd mention that. In addition, after those couple of pages, you then get the mini story called Shu-Torun Lives. Now, Kieron Gillen still wrote it, but the penciler for this is Giuseppe Camuncoli, the inker is Cam Smith, and the colorist is Java Tartaglia. It mentions that the story takes place months prior, and it seems to be a prequel to the Ashes of Jeddah arc that I tackled on this show, I think episode 44. Now this little story does have a small crawl, so here it is. The dreaded Death Star is a superweapon no more, destroyed by Luke Skywalker and the heroic Rebel Alliance. The evil Galactic Empire's most feared enforcer, Darth Vader, is charged with rooting out the rebels and restoring order to the galaxy. but with every victory against Vader and the Imperials, the more dangerous the rebels become. So this story is about 10 pages long, and it seems to serve as a sort of placeholder to explain vaguely about Trios a little bit, if someone hasn't read the Darth Vader comics. Now I would recommend people read the Darth Vader comics, or go and check out my episodes on the Darth Vader comics. Said episode 23, Star Wars Comics and Canon, is where Trios is introduced, but just in case, here is this little story, which I think is quite cool as well. So it starts with Ozzel and Veers, along with Vader on Mustafar. Now, Kendall Ozzel, he is moustached, and he actually gets force choked at the start of Empire Strikes Back. When they get to Hoth, and it turns out that the Star Destroyer got too close and the rebels were alerted to their presence because one Star Destroyer jumped a bit too close, that was Admiral Ozzel, so you get to watch him get killed in Empire Strikes Back. Now, Veers is a guy called Maximilian Veers. He is an officer in the AT-AT. So when you see in Empire Strikes Back, that guy whose helmet is a little bit like Darth Vader's helmet, but you can actually see his face. It's kind of got the back to it. And he's standing in an AT-AT, the walker things. He destroys the shield generator, and then a snow speeder crashes into the basically cockpit of the AT-AT, and you would have presumed he dies. But he is actually in the Empire Strikes Back certain point of view book, and his character is confirmed to have survived. So there are two Imperials that do show up in Empire Strikes Back right near the start. So they're on Mustafar with Vader talking about rebels, and one of them says that the rebels are too small. They keep slipping through their fingers. Every time they try and, catch them and things, they manage to escape because the Rebel Alliance just isn't big enough. Vader then has a sort of flashback and thinking of Leia in A New Hope, where she specifically says, the more you tighten your grip on this universe, the more systems will slip through your fingers, something along those lines. And it's quite cool just to have that little connection of Vader thinking about that. So Vader heads to Shu-Torun and confronts Queen Trios. He tells her that she needs to mine Jeddah and feed information to the rebels so they can sabotage the attempt to mine Jeddah. From doing that, she would then gain the rebels' trust, and then she needs to become invaluable to them. She needs to get their trust so much that she can basically get all of their secrets and things and then feed them back to Vader. Help them amass their forces and whatnot, and when that happens, then the Empire can attack. Vader also mentions the Alderaan fragment that he gave her. So he gave her a fragment, like a chunk of rock, which was part of Alderaan. Obviously, when Alderaan got blown up, it didn't just disintegrate. There were little pieces of space rock around. He gives one of those pieces to Trios to say to her that if you try anything, then Shu-Torun will become just like Alderaan. One of the guards gets close to Vader and threatens him. Trios doesn't hesitate and shoots him right in the face, and then says to Vader, "Oh, be my guest." And then Vader kills everyone there except Trios. And the final scene is quite gruesome. It's really, really cool. It just shows the brutality of Vader. And Vader says, "I trust they were expendable." And Trios says, "Lord Vader, as long as Shu-Torun lives, everyone is expendable." And as I said, you should really check out this panel in this comic because it's very hard hitting. You just see guards laying on the floor. There's blood around, splattered on the tables and the walls and stuff. It's quite gruesome for Star Wars, but I think it's really cool. And for clarity, the reason that Vader kills everyone there is specifically because he doesn't want any witnesses there, which is quite telling of Vader. Quite a lot of the time when Vader does stuff, whether or not it's above or below board, he does just kill everyone there to prevent witnesses and things. So, pretty terrifying. That's where that comic ends in that just harrowing little tale. Which leads us to issue number 51. It starts with Trios being on her ship that is still docked with the Mako-Ta base. She's there with her guards, they lock all their doors and then try and get away. But the ship is stuck being attached because the rebel base hasn't given them authority to undock and fly away, so they're kind of stuck there. Trios is asking her guards to try and slice in so they can escape, and as that happens, Leia and some more rebels are in pursuit of Trios and basically get to the doors. The rebels manage to break through, there's a shootout that happens and Trios runs away, and all of the guards get killed and Leia runs after Trios. Trios gets into an escape pod and then Leia shoots the controls and then they talk for a little bit, like a back and forth, basically Leia questioning why she betrayed her and etc. Trios says that she just had to do absolutely anything to prevent Shu-Torun going like Alderaan did, and then the escape pod jettisons. The rest of the rebel fleet is still slowly getting destroyed, sort of cruiser by cruiser. The cruisers that remain have their shields that are still holding, but they are slowly waning. And they say they are just happy that they didn't allow Shu-Toruns to touch any of their shields and things, because otherwise, they'd have all been dead. The cruisers still can't open their doors, the fighters are stuck, and everyone's just kind of waiting around, not really knowing what to do. But then it transpires that the doors will open if someone actually flies towards them due to their hardware having some sort of thing where if you're shooting at, I think it's a rebel transponder, basically a rebel signal, the doors will override whatever the Shu-Toruns have done to it and will open anyway. Now, because all the comms are down, none of the rebels can communicate with each other, so once Leia and her group find out this information, they can't really tell anyone else. So there's a guy called Badwing Kor, who's a background character in Rogue One. He's also a flight instructor, and he volunteers, he gets into a vehicle that basically has no shields and tries to fly it round to open the flight doors to the base to get some of the fighters out. It gets destroyed pretty instantly when he gets out there by a couple of TIE fighters, and the rebels are thinking, what on earth do we do next? As they're thinking that, Han and the Falcon appears, evades lots of TIE fighters and Star Destroyer cannons, and Chewie is in the cannon shooting at TIE fighters while it's going around. The Falcon gets near the doors and they're soon to open, it seems, but then the Falcon gets hit quite badly by a TIE fighter, and it turns out that it is Vader who is pursuing them, and it is Vader's TIE fighter who is shooting them. And that is where issue 51 ends. I do want to clarify, I am obviously scathing over the details quite quickly, but the visuals in this sort of comic batch is really good. The artwork is really, really cool, and if you like space battles, this is a really, really good comic to get your teeth into. But yeah, so on to issue number 52. Vader is still pursuing the Millennium Falcon, and the Falcon still heads for the doors. It gets quite close, and then Vader fires some missiles. The Millennium Falcon manages to just about avoid the missiles, but unfortunately misses the door, and is still trying to evade Darth Vader, but it is clear that Vader's not going to let them get near any of the other ships. One of the rebel ships that is near destruction decides to launch escape pods to try and save the people on there. Now, this commander of this is a guy called Leia, and he is actually in A New Hope. He's also visible at the awards ceremony and at the briefing room in A New Hope. You would recognise him if you saw him, but yeah, he's just a background character once again. The ship that he's on, he decides to launch some escape pods so all of the rebels aboard escape, and then the Imperials decide to prioritise trying to destroy the defenceless escape pods. And as that happens, the actual cruiser that this guy is on, Leia, it gets destroyed. While this is happening, Han is still being pursued by Vader. Han tells Chewie just to stop trying to shoot Vader because there's no point, because he can't hit him no matter what. But he's understanding that he needs to try and get the message out to the other fleet that the doors can open from the outside. Now, for clarity, the reason Han knows about that is because the comms on the Millennium Falcon work, and I believe that him and Leia had like a handheld communicator thing that wasn't connected to the main ships and things, which is why they can communicate. So Leia told Han about being able to open the ship's doors from the outside by flying into it and things. So the Falcon is still being pursued by Vader. It flies through the ship that explodes, Leia's ship that explodes, flies through that, and as he does that, they get a little bit of distance from Darth Vader, just because flying through that explosion where there's debris everywhere, they kind of went one way and Vader went the other way, so there's a little bit of distance between them. As that happens, they shoot C-3PO out of the Millennium Falcon in an escape pod, which hits the rebel ship. You see the pod that 3PO is in collide with the rebel ship. It kind of lands on its sort of outer part, and then 3PO has to crawl from where it lands to the airlock. In the rebel ship that Luke is in, R2 speeds out of the way where Luke is standing and starts beeping quite frantically. They open up the airlock and they see half of 3PO crawling through. It's just his sort of torso top half, and his legs were severely damaged in the crash. 3PO relays the message to Luke. Luke gets into his X-Wing and decides to fly at the doors from the inside. The leaders keep telling him not to, like General Dodana tells him not to and says, we need to figure this out. And Luke's like, look, we just need to get this done right now, so I'm just going to do it. So he gets into X-Wing, he flies straight at the doors, and while he's doing that, he thinks to himself, if I die, it's all because I trusted C-3PO, which is quite a little funny thing. The doors open up, and Luke asks the rest of his squad to follow him. So he flies out, he's got some X-Wings around him, Wedge Antilles is there with him, and Wedge mentions that they need some sort of call sign. Luke has to think for a minute and decides, in sort of commemoration of Jyn Erso, he calls his squadron Rogue Squadron, which is in canon where the name came from. The Millennium Falcon is outside the ship. You've now got a squadron of X-Wings led by Luke with Wedge there, and they're ready to sort of try and attack the Empire and try and help out the rest of the ships, kind of get themselves sorted. And that is where issue number 52 ends. So issue 53 starts with another rebel cruiser getting destroyed. This one now has Bob Hudson at the helm, so there's another character from A New Hope who is in the briefing room and the medal ceremony, who is no longer with us, which explains why they don't show up in later films. Following on from that, you've got the other sort of cruisers and things like that are still defenseless, their shields are still up, but most of them still haven't got their doors open because they obviously can't communicate with each other. So outside of the ships, you've still just got Rogue Squadron with Luke, Wedge and a couple of others, as well as Han as well. So Han is basically trying to be a vague commander and telling people what to do and saying, look, get close to the Star Destroyer because then you won't be taken out by their turbo lasers, and then TIE fighters won't shoot you quite as aggressively just in case they hit the Star Destroyer. So that all happens, and they vaguely congratulate Han, and then Luke says for the squadron to form and to head to Akbar and Hera's ship, so Admiral Akbar and Hera Syndulla's ship. So Luke actually uses the light stream thing that he was using in that sort of show that I mentioned quite early on, and he uses it so that Akbar can see his ship, and so Akbar follows his ship and then watches the ship go near some doors and open them. Then Akbar realizes that happens, and then he tells all of his fighters and things to launch, and then more fighters enter the fray. Meanwhile, Leia and a couple of other generals are trying to still figure out how to get the Shu-Torun's technology to stop hindering all of their ships and things. So they're trying to hack through. There's a couple of specialists who are doing it, and they basically say that to undo all of this, you'd need the override code. Now, the override code is not on Trios' flagship, as you would hope, but it is instead on the Executor, the Superstar Destroyer, which is commandeered and owned by Darth Vader. So Leia and General Draven decide to go and personate Trios on her ship, because obviously when they pursued her last time, she used an escape pod of her ship. She never actually undocked her ship and launched it, so they've got Trios' ship there. And the Empire don't know that Trios got into an escape pod and just escapes the area. So Leia is going to pretend to be Trios on the ship and go along with the squads to try and get the override code to then be able to submit it back to the rest of the fleet, and then everyone will be free of the Shu-Torun's and hopefully be able to use hyperdrive and things to get out. Now I want to clarify, General Draven is actually a guy in Rogue One. He is in these comics a little bit and stuff, but you'll mainly remember him because in the room when Jyn Erso is talking to Mon Mothma, Bail Organa appears, Cassian Andor's there, and there's a guy there who talks to her who is General Draven. Now he also speaks to Cassian, and he is the one who says to Cassian to kill Galen Erso as opposed to extracting him. He's the one who tells Cassian to kill him, and then when Cassian's ship gets shot down and doesn't report back, Draven is the one who decides to get the rebel ships to bomb Edu, which actually ends up killing Galen Erso anyway. So he's the one who actually was at the helm of all those things and caused a lot of that death. He seems to be quite heavy on his beliefs. He's not quite a Saw Gerrera extremist, but it is a lot more of that sort of kill now, ask questions later sort of mindset, it seems. So anyway, while that's all going on, Vader is shooting at the Millennium Falcon again, and the Millennium Falcon crash lands into a rebel hangar, fortunately seemingly evading Vader. The Imperials contact Vader and say that Trios is heading to the Executor, so Vader follows. So a bit of information about the Executor. So it's not like a normal Star Destroyer. You get a normal Star Destroyer, which is approximately 1.6 kilometers in length. This Star Destroyer is 19 kilometers in length, so it's over 10 times the length of that. And think about a ship being 19 kilometers long. That is ridiculously long. And the Executor is actually an Executor class Star Dreadnought. So it just means it's a massive, massive Star Destroyer. Now you may remember in the sequel trilogy, in The Last Jedi more specifically, you've got right at the very start, a Dreadnought gets destroyed. So Dreadnought is just the name for basically Executor class Star Dreadnoughts, just in colloquial slang. Obviously, you don't have to say that every single time, but basically Dreadnought is a really, really, really big Star Destroyer. And a few other little bits of information about this. So, as I said, Executor is 19 kilometers long. It has over 1,000 ships within it. It also has over 280,000 crew members, as well as over 38,000 troops and support staff. So you compare that to what a normal Star Destroyer has, which is 1.6 kilometers long. It has 9,700 troops and 37,200 crew. So you've got to think that it's basically 4 times less troops and about 7 times less crew, and the size is about 10 times smaller. So it's a big difference when you see them in things, and I just thought that was cool. And as I said, the Executor is Darth Vader's personal flagship, and it also gets destroyed in Return of the Jedi. You see an A-Wing pilot fly or crash into the bridge of the Superstar Destroyer, while I think Admiral Piet, I think, is in charge of it, and you watch the Superstar Destroyer fall and collide with the side of the Death Star 2 and then blow up. So anyway, back to the fray. So another cruiser is gone, one that's still getting destroyed, and while that's happening, Leia is cleared to land on the Executor. As they land the ship on the Executor, a couple of officers come out with some stormtroopers to inspect the ship. They immediately get shot, and Leia and the group say basically shoot in every direction, just hurry up, we need to get to the nearest terminal, kill everything in the way, we'll get the information and bail. So they're running in the hangar, and then they see that Vader's TIE Fighter is approaching in the distance. And this comic ends with Vader's TIE Fighter landing, and then he emerges. So now we move on to the second to last comic of this batch, issue number 54. So it starts off with Han getting into an X-Wing. Chewie wants to get into one too, but Han tells him that Wookiees wouldn't fit in X-Wings, they're just not built for it, which are quite sad, but what is quite cool is actually issue number 53, so the one before this, on the cover has Han wearing the Rebel flight gear, the orange jumpsuit, and getting into an X-Wing. He doesn't actually do that until this issue, so, on the cover of this issue you've got Leia basically hiding from Vader with a lightsaber, but still, it's really cool artwork and things, and while Han is in the X-Wing, because as I said in the last one, the Millennium Falcon got quite damaged, had to crash land in the Rebel hangar, so he's like, I need to get back out there, I need to help them. So he gets into an X-Wing and jumps out there, Han being heroic once again. So it cuts to the Executor, where it's got Leia and the Rebels managed to obtain the override code quite quickly, and as that's happening, Vader is still pursuing, and Vader is killing groups of the Rebels. So there's quite a lot of them that sort of landed on the Star Destroyer, and all of them kind of headed in one direction, but every so often a batch of them stayed behind to kind of delay Vader, which is not a job I would want in the Rebel Alliance, being basically cannon fodder for Vader, because you've just got absolutely no chance whatsoever. As evidenced in any comic that Vader is in, he just slaughters everyone, and he's incredibly badass. But anyway, aside from that, Leia and the gang manage to sort of outmaneuver Vader. They kind of vaguely go in a circle, almost. That's how I kind of envision it in my head. I'm sure it's a lot more complicated than that. Leia wants Draven to go back to the fleet and she'll stay behind. Draven won't allow her to do that. He says he doesn't want to be the guy who was wrong, referring to what happened with Jyn Erso, because he was the one who said, let's not do the thing on Scarif, along with a lot of other people were too, but he was, he doesn't want to be remembered as the guy who was wrong and the guy who was mean to Jyn Erso, essentially. So Draven insists that he stays behind to try and slow down Vader, while Leia escapes in a TIE fighter. And then it shows that Vader does not have any mercy and kills all of them, including Draven, which explains why, he doesn't show up in future films. And for clarity, Draven isn't in A New Hope, because he was introduced in Rogue One. I don't know where he was at the time of A New Hope, I'm sure the information is somewhere, but he's not in A New Hope. And also I forgot to mention his first name is Davits, so D-A-V-I-T-S, if that is relevant to any of you. Davits Draven. So Leia is flying this TIE fighter away from the Star Destroyer, the Executor, but she can't find the comms, and she mentions that the communicator must be in these TIE fighters' helmets. Luke and Han are still flying around in an X-Wing, and they notice this TIE fighter by itself. They start to pursue it, but the TIE fighter manages to evade quite well, and Luke says that something feels wrong. The TIE is acting weird and isn't flying in the same way that most Imperial cadets would fly. So they're kind of pursuing them and wondering what's going on, and Leia's trying to figure out frantically what to do to be able to show to them that she's not the enemy, because obviously TIE fighters don't have any shields, so you get shot once, maybe twice, you're basically gone. She manages to evade both of them enough and then shoots another TIE fighter. They then take note that this TIE fighter shot another one, so think that one of their fighters must be in it, so they protect it. It cuts to C-3PO, who's being repaired by someone called Mako-Ta. I may be mispronouncing that as M-E-O-R-T-I, Mako-Ta. And Mako-Ta is a character who comes along in the comics a little bit more. She's an engineer. There's not really much else to say at this point without just telling you everything that's going to happen in future issues. But yeah, Mako-Ta, she is fixing up C-3PO. Just basically having a breather, finding it nice that it's not right in the middle of the action and she hasn't really got anything else to do. So that's what she does. So while that's happening, Han and Luke are taking the TIE fighter with Leia in it, which obviously they don't know that Leia's in there, back to a Rebel cruiser, but they realise that the doors will not open for the TIE fighter because it doesn't have a Rebel transponder. So Han and Luke then have to fly, one of them in front of the TIE fighter and one of them behind the TIE fighter, to not only protect the TIE fighter, but also to allow it to actually get onto the Rebel cruiser. They manage to get really close, and then Luke, I think, is at the back, and he gets shot, as in the X-Wing does. Things start to smoke and set on fire and things, and he manages to crash land into the Rebel hangar. Leia manages to jump out of the TIE fighter, give the code chip to Mako-Ta, who runs off to give it to High Command, who can implement it. And while Luke's ship is flaming, it shows that he got an electric shock, and he's a bit shaken up and things, and smoking a small amount, but he is okay. It is confirmed that override code worked, the systems are now operational, and the ship that Leia and the guys are on escapes. As that escapes, it shows that the Empire are looking over and seeing that one of the ships escaped, but there's still quite a lot of Rebel ships still there, so they stay continuing the attack on the remaining ships. The last couple of panels is that Luke and Leia want to go back and save the others, but General Dodonna is having a problem with it. He said we can't risk absolutely everything we've just saved to go back and potentially lose it all again. They have that back and forth, they're arguing quite a bit, and that's basically where that comic ends. So we move on to the final comic of this arc, number 55. It starts off with Vader and the Imperials watching the Rebel ships and the rebel ships look like they're all about to get destroyed. They're pretty close. The ship's shields are starting to fail, and obviously quite a few ships have already been destroyed. While that's happening, a rebel cruiser appears and starts shooting at the top of the Executor. So the other Star Destroyers change their target to target this one rebel cruiser that's come out of hyperspace to attack, and it's been confirmed over the comms that they have taken the bait. Once that happens, Rogue Squadron, the group of X-Wings, come out of hyperspace with a bunch of escape pods and a transport. So it turns out the gang are all sort of split apart. I think Luke and Leia are on the transport, and they are heading to get the leaders from the Mako-Ta base that are still just stranded on there. So that's Mon Mothma and a lot of the leaders and figureheads of their respective worlds, because without them it'd be hard to rally their systems to the rebel cause. While that's happening, Han is in an X-Wing protecting the defenseless pods, so he is trying to make sure that none of the pods that obviously haven't got any defenses on them at all get destroyed. Miotri is getting sort of shot at by a TIE fighter. She starts to freak out, and Han manages to swoop in and save her. She manages to land and then gives the override code to Chewbacca. Chewbacca is on the ship that Admiral Akbar is on, so Admiral Akbar's ship then activates fully. Hera's ship then shortly after gets some codes as well, and so the majority of the rebel ships are now starting to be able to get full functions of their weapons and be able to use hyperspace. Han's ship gets hit and is disabled, and while that happens, Luke and Leia are getting the ambassadors, who are crucial to the Rebel Alliance, onto their ship. To clarify, when Han's ship is disabled, it got hit and then it's just kind of floating. It's not fully destroyed and hasn't blown up in a dramatic way, it's just lost all its power. Leia and Luke then try and hatch a plan to save Han. All of the rebel ships jump except one, which is one that General Dodonna is on. General Dodonna's ship gets destroyed. You would recognise Dodonna, he's in A New Hope, and he's got a beard. He's the one who gives the presentation about destroying the Death Star. I may have said that slightly earlier in this, I can't fully remember, but he's one of the most recognisable rebel leaders who still isn't in the film very much. While in the ship as well, Han is just floating there, and he's got R2-D2 in the ship with him as well. And R2 is beeping a lot, and Han says, look, the translator in the ship is gone. I can't understand what you're saying. And he pulls out a hip flask and starts drinking. I want to mention that specifically because it's kind of unsure in certain parts whether people can fully understand the droids, mainly Astromechs and things, and BB-8 and things who like beep and stuff. It's unclear how people always know what they're saying, and I think it's basically that, yeah, when they're in the ship automatically translates what they're saying, which obviously makes a lot of sense and explains quite a lot, and I was really not actually aware of this until this comic specifically. And obviously what I would assume is that people like Luke, when you hear R2 beeping and whatever, you then see the translation, so you kind of can connect the dots, and after a long period of time around something that is basically beeping and making weird noises, you can probably get the gist. I mean, also, when you hear R2-D2 making noises and stuff like that, you can kind of tell if he's angry or scared or anything like that. Especially in Empire Strikes Back, I think it's quite a good range of his emotions and whatnot. I say emotions, he's a droid. Getting into that is a whole nother kettle of fish, which I'm not going into right now. So, moving swiftly on. Han's ship gets comms to say brace, and he's like, what's happening? And then Luke and Leia are in the transport cruiser, and they shoot a tow cable which connects onto the X-Wing. It then is connected to one of the Rebels' bigger ships, and they manage to jump out of the way using hyperspace. It is confirmed that they are low on fuel, so they land on a moon, and they receive a transmission from Mon Mothma. It turns out that all of the rebel cruisers or rebel cells, they've all split up and gone to different places, just to make it even harder for the Empire to actually find them. And Mon Mothma also promotes all of them. Leia becomes a general, Luke becomes a commander, and Han becomes a colonel. Because this is one of those things that I mentioned quite near the start, which is Kieron Gillen was like, the idea is that by the time of Empire Strikes Back, so many people are quite high up, and in military terms, that in the space of a couple of years, that's still a really big jump. And obviously the only way that can really happen is if all the generals basically die. You need to get people who can get up to those ranks to be generals and things. So I just quite like that explanation. And also this whole comic basically explains why there are so many characters that are in A New Hope that don't show up again in Empire Strikes Back. And obviously some characters who are in Rogue One who also don't show up in other films. Han asks where Chewbacca is and the Millennium Falcon, and Mon Mothma says she doesn't know. They're obviously with Admiral Akbar, they've all separated, and none of them know where the other ones are. Mothma just knows to send these transmissions to people and can respond to them, but she can't confirm where everyone is because they just don't know. She said that basically every ship has been told to disperse, hide, recover, and then we can reorganize and strike in whatever way each cell decides, and we'll kind of go from there. We won't do another big large scale attack like we did. We need to hold back, recover, and improve our numbers. Han says if they can push one more jump from the ship that they're in hyperspace, then he may be able to have a few ideas of where to go from here. Because, using hyperspace takes hyperfuel. One of those forms is coaxium, which is all detailed in the Solo movie. So obviously you can run out of fuel. You can't just automatically do hyperspace whenever you want, which I quite like. And so they're saying, yeah, he's got an idea. And before we get to see what that idea is, there's one page of Vader and Palpatine. Now, there's not a lot of dialogue here, and rather than paraphrasing, I'm just going to read it for you guys. So it starts with Palpatine. It seems your master stroke falls short. The rebels were not annihilated, my apprentice. And Vader says, they lost over half their cruisers. They have lost over 90% of their fighters. What is left cannot be described as a rebellion. They can no longer hurt us. We will annihilate them at our own pleasure. The loss of the Death Star made the galaxy think they could rebel. This has shown that the rebellion can never win. And Palpatine simply says, it is satisfactory. So then back to the gang for the last couple of pages. They go to Nar Shaddaa, and Han gives Sana Starros data that he got from the Ring of Catherine, and it turns out that him being there was actually a job for her. She gives him a few credits as a reward for the job, and he asks if they can be taken as cargo. She agrees with them, and they head off. And then the last couple of panels is C-3PO talking to R2-D2, and I'm just going to read it out as a nice little closer here. This is a terrible situation. All that death, R2, now hiding in Sana Starros' ship, everything the Masters worked for in ruins. It is quite simply awful. And R2-D2 beeps. Oh yes, I'm happy you made it as well. I'm glad that engineer Miorti escapes too. She was very kind to me. There is not enough kindness in the galaxy. And R2-D2 beeps again. Why yes, R2, Miorti is a lovely name. It means hope. And that's where the comic ends. And I just think that's a really nice way to end it, It's just one of those subtle things that just makes me smile. So that is the end of the Hope Dies arc, guys. It is quite a brutal one. It's a really, really good one to read because most of it is space battles and stuff. So when you see it, it is really cool. And a lot of the characters, like I mentioned, like Dodana and people like that, and Draven, you may not recognize them from my description of them, but when you read the comics, the artist Salvador Larroca has done an excellent job of making them look like their movie counterparts. I do know that Salvador Larroca does or has been criticised in the past because I think he traces quite a lot from like movie stills and things, which is why a lot of his shots look really realistic and really cool. But what comes with that is you get that sort of uncanny valley with it a little bit, where occasionally, I didn't find in this arc too much, I think it was the Ashes of Jeddah arc, there was like one or two panels where when you've got Luke or Han's face not quite dead on, it looks a little bit uncanny. The uncanny valley where it looks like 98% like them, but something is a bit off. A lot of people don't like that. I personally quite like it in these because the main characters are so iconic. Having them look as close to the movie counterparts as possible, just for me personally, adds to my enjoyment of it. But yeah, that is the Hope Dies arc, guys. Really hope you enjoyed that. It was quite a big one, lots of little connections and things. What we've got planned coming up. So next week is going to be part 1 of the Kanon comics. Now, Kanon Jarrus, he is a character from the animated show Star Wars Rebels, which is my favourite animated Star Wars show, controversially. I enjoy it more than Clone Wars because of Kanon. I think Kanon is one of the most interesting Jedi in all of Star Wars. And this is basically him surviving Order 66. That's what the comics are based on. There's a little bit of stuff that sort of air quotes present day in Star Wars Rebels, but it's few and far between. I think there's like one vague mission that goes across like 12 issues or something. So you get like a page or two of them in current time, the Rebel crew doing stuff. And then it does flashbacks to Kanon when he was a Padawan and things. And it's really interesting hearing or reading those comics and things. There's a couple of really, really cool parts in there. But as it is 12 issues, I'm not going to be tackling it all at once because that will be far too much. I'm going to do part 1 and then in a few weeks' time I'll do part 2. So next week is going to be Kanon. The week after that is going to be the next batch of Afro Comics. The week after that is going to be the last Age of batch that I'm doing. So this is going to be the Age of Resistance heroes, which is going to be quite a few of them. I think it's Poe, Rey, Finn, Rose, Maz Kanata, BB-8, Admiral Holdo. I think that's all of them. But yeah, those one-shot comics, like I did last week with the villains, I'm going to do that again with the heroes. Then that'll be me done for the Age of comics in total. And then when I finish part 2 of my thing with Kanon, that'll then also be every mini-series that is canon that is done by Marvel. So from there, I'm probably going to then tackle the Vader comics. I've obviously done the first batch of Vader comics by Kieron Gillen, which is what introduced Aphra and things. I'm probably going to tackle the second batch of Vader comics, which is by Charles Soule, which is my favourite comic run of anything ever. I love it. And it's set just after episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, so that's really cool. And then I'll also probably be tackling the Poe Dameron ongoing series as well. I think I will occasionally tackle modern stuff, like there's a War of the Bounty Hunters thing coming out. There's the High Republic comics at the moment, the High Republic Adventures comics. There's the Bounty Hunter comics. There's loads ongoing at the moment. I think there's 5 or 6. I think there's 6 ongoing series, because you've got the third batch of Darth Vader, the second batch of Star Wars, the second batch of Dr. Aphra, the Bounty Hunters comics, the High Republic comics, and then the High Republic Adventures comics. So 6 comics a month, basically, which is a lot of fun. It gives me a lot to read. Aside from that, guys, I'd say, check out all the other amazing shows on Comics in Motion. I've started putting some of these videos in playlists on YouTube, so I've put all the main run of Star Wars comics together, all the Vader stories together. I think I've done all the Aphra ones as well. I am planning at some point to do all of the original trilogy stuff and all the sequel trilogy stuff, and etc, etc. It's just, it takes a bit of time to go through all of the videos on there. But obviously, you guys can all contact me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat, or you can contact the guys at Comics in Motion, at Comics in Motion P on Twitter and I think Instagram and Facebook, and the message will get through to me. I also would say I have got a Patreon, patreon.com/Genuine Chit-Chat. I do occasionally release episodes on there early for Star Wars Comics in Canon, mainly book reviews and things like that, because these sort of episodes take a while to record and edit and etc. I also post photos of the comics, normally a day or two early than I do on social media. You also will get access to the Afterthoughts show that myself and Megan do. There's 2 episodes of that a week, and they're normally 10 or 15 minutes or so, and we talk about movies or TV series. It's just quite a nice short thing. We don't generally spoil the things we're talking about unless we, if they're made in like the 80s or something, generally we do, but if it's a newer film we tend not to, or a series. But we just give our thoughts on it, and we've been going through, we've done the prequels of Star Wars, and we've done Solo. We're due to record Rogue One shortly. We've watched the Captain America trilogy, the Thor trilogy, and we've also got... We've watched quite a few chick flicks and things, like we watched Dirty Dancing recently, we watched Rocky Horror Picture Show recently that I absolutely despised. We watched the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man trilogy, we watched the Andrew Garfield ones, but what I try and do is each week you'll generally get one superhero or Star Wars Afterthoughts episode, and then one that's either about a series, a documentary, or a film that's nothing to do with those things, so it kind of mixes it up a bit. So as well as my normal show, Genuine Chit-Chat, which, different guest each episode, as well as this show, you can also, for as little as I've made a new tier now for literally £1 a month, which I think is like $1.50 or something, which is I think less than a cup of coffee almost anywhere. If you pay that a month, you get access to the bare bones content, which is just Afterthoughts, well, the feed that Afterthoughts goes on, anything early gets released goes on there, as well as early access to certain episodes of Genuine Chit-Chat as well. When I release them in like 2 parts and people have to wait a week for the second part, I release them all in one go as one unsplit episode on the feed. But if you're willing to support the show, you find this enjoyable, and you want to vaguely fund my Star Wars comic obsession, then please support me on Patreon, because it would mean the absolute world to me. I know a few of you guys already have, and it's been wonderful, and I've been getting really good feedback on there, but obviously the more the merrier. Aside from that, guys, that's really it. Just check out all the other amazing shows on Comics in Motion. I'll be having more of the guys from Comics in Motion on, and keep an eye out, because Matthew B. Lloyd of Classic Comics, me and him recorded an amazing episode together about some of the classic Star Wars stories, including there's a comic newspaper strip, and it's got Boba Fett teaching Luke Skywalker how to ski. It's just the most balmy thing ever, but it is so much fun. So, in Genuine Chit-Chat, I think in about 3 weeks' time, part 1 of the episode will be released, so keep an eye out for that as well. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for listening. As always, please review Comics in Motion on iTunes, leave comments on YouTube, review Genuine Chit-Chat and Comics in Motion on anywhere that you listen to your podcast apps and things, share on social media, tell your friends, and all that usual jazz. As always, guys, thank you so much for listening, and may the Force be with you.